Please welcome former mayor of Minneapolis and president and CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, R.T. Rybak.
All right, so the amazing thing that just happened to me is there's this guy backstage, and he's my height, and he says he taught himself how to dunk a basketball. And he also is a futurist, and he's written an incredible report on 13 pieces of technology that will improve and change healthcare. So you've heard a lot of good speakers today. He will, in fact, be the best. So those of you who are here, look alive, because he's about to come out. 2 minutes before he comes out, I want to tell you why I care so much about Manova. I'm the CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation. Unlike the lucky people who run a traditional foundation where they get to decide where all the money goes, we have the second oldest community foundation in the country, and it means that we've got 1,800 donors who put out $70 million every year, and we work with them on good places to invest, and one of the key places they care about is healthcare. And they invest across every piece of the ecosystem here in the cities. And in my volunteer life, I'm chair of Destination Medical Center, which is the $4.5 billion public-private partnership to remake Rochester with a dramatically improved Mayo Clinic and a city that becomes America's #1 city for health. I care a lot about healthcare. I care also about the future, and one of the things that's so important about this conference is that this, in its first year, is establishing the fact that this, the healthiest state in the United States, should also be the one that leads in the future of how we make this whole world a healthier place. So thank you for being part of this, and we want to stand with the rest of the community to make sure Manova grows. So what we're going to bring out now is Josh McHugh. Now, Josh started as a writer at Forbes, and during that time, he happened to be writing right as the internet began to break, and he was the guy who would put on that Forbes list names that most people didn't really recognize, but they had a lot to do with where technology was going. He went out to Silicon Valley, opened the office for Forbes out there, and then went to work for Wired. During that period of time, he also wrote some really interesting first-person accounts, like that one about how over 6 months can I learn how to dunk a basketball. I want to know. I wish I would have known that a long time ago. Did things on weightlessness and others, but he is now CEO and editor-in-chief of Attention Span Media, which does really fascinating work where you take interactivity and build it into lots of different shows on the internet and multiple other things he'll tell you all about that I don't understand as well as he does. But what he's really going to talk about is that report on how technology is shaping healthcare, and something that I think you'll care a lot about. So please welcome, and please ask him to dunk that basketball, Josh McHugh.
Hey everybody, thanks for hanging in there until at the end of the day. I'm Josh McHugh. I'm the CEO of Attention Span Media, and we do a lot of different things for a lot of different clients, but Attention Span is mainly a strategy agency, and our research and content arm is called Attention Forward. And Attention Forward is basically a bunch of people sort of like me, recovering journalists. Everyone has a technology or science background, and everybody in the group also really likes to get their hands dirty, and I'll come back to the team a little bit. And so what I'm calling this presentation is why the future is darker and brighter than you think. So a little bit more about the Forward Group and Attention Span and how we work. We focus on the convergence of the worlds of healthcare, sports, and food. There are a lot of technologies that affect all three of these, and some of the most impactful things that one industry can learn are innovations that are being developed for these adjacent industries. So One of the first things we did as a group was called the Future of Sports. We actually did 2 editions of that. A lot of fun. We got called in on a request to help a company that didn't have a reputation for innovation build one. And it started out as a request for a futurist. And as we worked with them a little bit more, we decided that instead of having a futurist come in and speak, we would help them become futurists for their industry. So we did that. It was an amazing ride, and we developed a practice that we refer to as collaborative futurism. So not simply jetpacks and flying cars, although those 2 things are real. They're just not scaled yet. But Larry Page will get his flying cars out into the world, I'm confident. But what we did was we brought our science and technology connections and background, and most importantly, our method of going out and finding out what the absolute latest, newest thing that's happening in the world in a certain area is. And we brought that back, and then we would collaborate with our clients because we weren't going to beat them in knowledge about their own industry, in operating knowledge. They were 100 years deep in that. But what we could tell them is things they didn't know about what's happening on the frontiers of technology and innovation. So collaborative futurism is what we call it. We do a lot of work with some clients in the food industry as well. That's probably the most rewarding of all of them, because we do take in-kind payment. And then in 2017, a request came in that was actually a little more challenging than the other areas, and it was from the Jacobs Institute in Buffalo, New York. And the Jacobs Institute is an incredibly innovative cardiovascular research institute. They are led by a fellow named Nelson Hopkins and another doctor named Adnan Siddiqui. And they are really impressive in that they basically architecturally set their facility up so that cardiologists and neurosurgeons would have to be in the same space, not while operating all the time, but so that they would end up having coffee together, having lunch together, and trading thoughts and solutions. But as innovative as this particular institute is, the problem they came to us with was that they have they had, I would say, a medical community in Western New York that, despite having a lot of amazing people in institutions like Roswell Park Cancer Center and University at Buffalo with a ton of smart people, they were working at cross purposes. There were turf wars. There was too much competition in familiar low margin areas. And so what they asked us to do was to go out to the frontiers of technology and figure out how the landscape of healthcare is going to change in the coming 20 years, and where the opportunities are going to be, maybe just as importantly, to look at the really, really bad scenarios, the worst case scenarios, and to, in the end, put together something that the Western New York healthcare community could rally around. So that's what we set out to do. Let me go back here. So this is the team. Poe Bronson is a guy. He was a writer at Wired when I was there, but more importantly, he's written several books that were well received. One called Top Dog: The Science of Competition, another called What Should I Do With My Life, which he wrote right after the dot-com bubble burst. And he's won a lot of science journalism awards. Josh Spinogle, he's a Mohs surgeon. He studied at Mayo, and he also is a writer of several best-selling thrillers. Ethan Waters, amazing sociological investigator. He wrote a book called Crazy Like Us about how the U.S. Pharma industry exports maladies to the rest of the world to create markets for its products. Patrick House, a very interesting guy. He's a neuroscience PhD from Stanford, also writes for The New Yorker. Most recently has been working for a brain-computer interface startup, and probably brought the darkest scenarios of everybody during this thing. And then Tyson Law, whose design work you'll see here, and whose design really pushed the whole project forward. So these are the forces of change that we look at, and I'm going to go through each one of these in detail. No, I'm not. That would be terrible. But the idea is, there are a lot of different things happening, and if you're someone who tries to keep up with technology, you know how challenging it is. So these are things that we're constantly monitoring, and for this particular project, we boiled them down to the forces that we thought were going to have the most impact. So we got these, and I'm not even going to go through these in detail. I think everybody's familiar with all these concepts for sure. So we've got this set of things that are driving forward, that are powering progress. Pretty much all of them probably have exponential curves associated with them in one way or another. But so the next step in our methodology is to look at the forces of inertia, the reasons that innovation doesn't happen faster in healthcare, which initially, as we looked into it, it was amazing to us, given the sheer percentage of incredibly bright people, and knowing, interviewing doctors, many of whom have plenty of patents of their own, as many as a lot of the engineers that we spend time with. So this image is a rendition of the forces of change colliding with the forces of inertia. But the way we came up with which scenarios we were going to spell out was that we ranked the forces of inertia in order of, and this isn't the ranking, but in order of which ones were the most agile, and then cross-referenced them with the forces of change, which ones were the most powerful. So where the most powerful forces of change hit the most agile forces of inertia, that's where we started to build a roadmap. That's where the change was going to happen first. So first thing that came up, and this came from Dr. Spinogle, because he is a physician, and it was surprising to me. I'm sure it's pretty familiar to everybody here, but the morale crisis among physicians, the high burnout, we've heard about it earlier today, the high suicide rate. It was, if there are two sets of folks that you don't want unhappy, it's physicians and airline pilots, and this was a real surprise to me to see this, but it's true. So the trend lines are not good either. It's getting worse. It's going up, 9% over a few years, and it doesn't look good. And like a lot of things that we looked at, the first scenarios that we ran into were pretty bleak. But then as we dug a little bit more, we started to see some light shining. We ran into startups like this company Augmetics. Finally, Google Glass finds a reason to exist, and it's really changed a lot of physicians' daily lives to be able to talk to their patients, spend a lot more time sitting with the folks that they're trying to heal, rather than being a data entry clerk. The data entry person is on the back end of this, watching and listening through the headset, and the results have been fantastic. Another company, Health Tensor, uses AI to basically take what the doctor is recording or what the scribe is recording, and then runs it incredibly quickly against the database of codes that they need to use to properly record the diagnosis. Olive AI, started by a former NSA operative, and I think that's probably the kind of person that it took to start to untangle the EHR snarls that are out there, getting good results out of these guys as well early on. Another set of things that we looked at were pandemics, and with the growth of cities, cities turning into mega cities, climate change, and people traveling a lot more, crossing borders, flying from country to country a lot more. We did see that there's a greatly increased chance of a major pandemic, probably the flu, coming in the next 20 years. But yeah, that was a little grim to hear that. Also, obesity, we've heard about it earlier today. Obesity is going up. Type 2 diabetes is spiking as well. We call that the lifestyle disease avalanche. So those are a couple of not so happy near future scenarios. But we did come up with some rays of hope for getting those pandemics under control. DNA sentinels, as genomic analysis becomes essentially free and fast, there will be a lot more that we can do at borders and crossing points, where we could find out who's carrying viruses. Rapid vaccine development. You'll hear a little bit more about the FDA and some surprises for us that we found there. Immune system engineering, so that even before you're fully developed, you can re-engineer your immune system so that you're not as susceptible. And then after this came from Dr. House, this work, and I was still feeling the grimness of the first two, and I pushed him out. I said, well, you got to give me something. What else? And he said, that's the best I can do here. I said, well, what about 50 years out? He said, I still don't see much change. I said, well, what about at the end of the century? He's like, oh, end of the century, we could not have viruses anymore. So that was a nice answer. On the obesity side, on the lifestyle avalanche, you've got Google's spin-off Verily doing a joint venture with Sanofi. They're going after type 2 diabetes, and all three of these efforts are combining different approaches of data, behavior modification, and smartphone apps. So Verta Health's another one. They're using remote coaches to talk to people. They're getting amazing results. And then Retrofit, also an app-based coaching solution. So those are some of the ways that the really innovative companies are attacking the obesity and diabetes issues. Job displacement. One of the things that was the most stark that we kept hearing was about how in radiology AI systems were outpacing and identifying or out-diagnosing human doctors. And so last year, it was a little controversial the way it was set up, but ChexNet out of Stanford made the news by outperforming a panel of Stanford radiologists by a pretty dramatic margin. And we had a lot of conversations while we were creating the report with radiologists. What do you think about this? Are you worried about, you worried about the robots taking your job, about AI? And they were pretty sanguine, honestly, because I think, what a lot of radiologists know is that quite a bit of the work that they do is, it's not busy work, say, but it's repetitive, and it's work that they wouldn't necessarily mind handing off to a highly capable AI. So along comes a thing called Swarm AI. The company is called Unanimous AI. And what this thing does is it links together a group of experts in whatever the field is and synthesizes their input on a question in a bounded amount of time. I think it's usually a minute that the group gets to decide. And the AI is interpreting the sort of certainty or hesitancy in the way that the doctors in this case are indicating what they want the answer to be. And as the minute goes by, there's a kind of a tug of war, and the puck here, it looks like a Ouija board. But anyway, this thing did 33% better than the AI. So there's a lot of potential there for working together with AI, and that's just scratching the surface. This thing came along and has been mainly used to try to beat Vegas on sports betting, and has done a really good job of that. But there are higher callings than sports betting. So one of the really positive situations that we saw that came together for us was this trickle-up innovation, is what we ended up calling it. It's a combination of innovations that are either developed for developing areas or developed in developing areas. And we looked for places where we're basically doing a 10x reduction in price for similar levels of care. And so one of them is a phototherapy machine for jaundiced babies. The sort of state-of-the-art is about $3,000. Using the D-Rev machine, you can do it for $350. ECG machines, even a more dramatic reduction in price, and then MRI machines, which I think is really exciting, and it goes back to the radiology stuff, where one of the reasons that the radiologists aren't that worried is because even if AI is to take up a lot of that analysis work, as MRIs and other kinds of scans become cheaper, a lot more people will get them a lot more often. So all good things, but the trickle-up innovation is kind of incredible in how much of a drop-off in price you can achieve. One thing that we hadn't seen referred to this way before, and it took us a while to come up with the term for it, was previvors. So this is as genomic analysis becomes cheap and widespread, we'll know what diseases are probably going to happen to us, or we'll know what chances we have of getting certain kinds of disease. Where this gets really interesting is in cases where there's a somewhat rare disease, but not so rare that the market is vanishingly small. So number of people that are, see a diagnosis coming their way 20 years down the line and start to do something about it now. And what we've seen with folks with the breast cancer genes is that they will band together, they'll share information and apply pressure to pharmaceutical companies or regulators to make treatments available faster than they ordinarily would have been. So that's really fascinating development, and we're just in the very, very early stages of that. Regeneration is one of my favorites. We've got an aging population, but that doesn't mean that life is going to be worse for that aging population. There are a lot of different approaches to making advanced age a lot more enjoyable and active. A lot of it has to do with telomere science, and I've got a few different approaches up here, but really amazing work being done in those places. Policy relaunch. When we did this report, we thought we're gonna really be going out on a limb, because we're sure by the time we have this thing finished, healthcare policy will be nailed down in the U.S. But in a lot of ways, it's not great news. But in some ways, the news is good that there isn't an agreed upon set of policies yet, and it's sort of wide open for innovation. So it's a little bit of Wild West, and some of the things that we recommend here are really go after interoperability, and true interoperability is preferable to a lot of the versions that are out there on the market right now, because there's going to be so much more data coming in from all the health sensors that are out there. Also genomics, back to the previvors. If you are building strategy for any kind of healthcare organization, definitely be ready to contend with and market to and work hand in hand with, preferably, groups of previvors who are banding together to exert pressure for treatments. AI, back to the swarm. Learn how to use AI. It's going to take a lot of people going back for a little extra school, but it'll be worth it. Big thing, the mindset of a trade-off between quality of care and cost of care. If you focus enough on innovation, best case, you won't have to make that trade-off. And then politically, healthcare is probably the most winning issue for candidates right now. So no matter which side you're from, if you've got a candidate who is smart on healthcare and who's going to push innovation, get behind that candidate, because that's what everybody can agree on. The only thing maybe that everybody can agree on right now. So thanks a ton. It's been fun talking to you, and this is a fantastic conference. Thanks for having me.